Hello, it's John the Game Trainer here. I'm just doing a quick intro video to talk a little bit further about 18GB because I did the unboxing a couple of weeks ago. I've played through it a few times on my own. I've unfortunately not had a chance to play it with other players, but I have quizzed Dave and some other people who have managed to play it. So I'm pretty confident with the rules. And so I'm just going to talk about a little bit about what's specific to 18GB. I'm going to try and aim it for somebody who maybe knows 1846 or 1889. The other two videos I've done, the other two games I've done videos for, just so you've got a reference and I'm not having to start from kind of 18XX beginnings. Just a little note, this is currently set up for a 3-player game. I will show a quicker and easier shot of this. So there's a whole series of player-specific setup things, and I've just gone for the general setup for 3 players, and there's a random 3 that I've picked. So there's one of 3 that I've picked, so I've done that already. I just to kind of make the video a little bit easier so I can lay everything out for you. One of the first things to note about this game is just where it sits in the kind of the big arc of 18XX games. And so you typically have the more engineering ones, which kind of fall under the 1829 umbrella, and you have the 1830 ones, which are more the share shenanigans. And so, for example, 1889 probably fits under the more, well, 1889 is an 1830 variant, and there are other engineering games that fit into the 1829 kind of mould. This follows on a lot from the 1829 engineering ideas. There's not a huge amount of share shenanigans, and there's quite a lot of rules that kind of make it unattractive to, for example, dump companies on other people, to trash other people's shares, and all that kind of stuff. You can do it, but it's just not very attractive. And so the other element, which we haven't necessarily seen yet if you're only coming from those previous games, is we have what they call preferred stock. And so at the beginning of the game, all the companies will start out as a 5-share company. Okay. And this will have, you can see there's a 40 and a 20%. So at the beginning of the game, you just look at the 40%. And so there are only going to be 5 shares available, and each one is 20%, and the president's is 40%. And so that's it is seen in other games, but it's not something necessarily, if you've only seen 46 and 89, you would have seen. When you float the company, it floats in a similar way to 89, where you get the money that you floated for, but in 89 you get 10 times. And in this, because it's a 5-share company, you get 5 times. And then later in the game, you can convert it, and I will explain that process probably in more detail when it happens. You can convert it, and so this, all the shares halve their value. So this was 40% of the company, and it now becomes 20% of the company, and you get a whole bunch of extra 10% shares put into the open market. At that point, there's a little bit of stock movement, but where your stock price ends up, you get 5 times that new price. Okay, so that could be down here, so you could actually get less money in than you did originally, or it could be up here and you get more money in. And so that's an interesting point to kind of, that's a way of facilitating kind of capitalization later in the game. The other interesting thing is the game ends in either 2 ways. When somebody hits either these 2 spots, you finish that OR, or when all the trains that are in the available trains have been bought. That will also, you just finished that OR and then it stops. Again, so then there are no bankruptcies in this game, and there's no loan taking in this game, which again, things that you might have seen in other games. Another interesting one is you can sell the whole of a company into the open market. Usually there's a limit. The limit is typically, I think, about 50%, which kind of stops some people. Sometimes you aren't able to sell into the open market, but in this game you can sell into the open market. And that does mean that it's possible to have a company with no director, and that's what this is for, to have a company that's acting and paying out, etc. And so then there are special rules on how to do that. If your company has no train, you aren't actually required to buy one. What happens is you become insolvent, and so you take that card. And again, there are special rules on how to treat an insolvent company. When a 5-share company that doesn't have a train may, during the operating round, when it would need to buy a train, become a 10-share company, but it gets hit harder with the share drop, which again we haven't really talked about. But there's when you're flipping it voluntarily, you drop by 2 jumps, and then you take 5 times that value. When you when you have a kind of a forced train purchase, you can flip it, and it drops by 3, and that 3 is on top of the share value having gone down for not having a train, and it will also drop again the following OR. Actually, no, that's not true. So yeah, it will drop before, and then it won't have. It will drop 3, and then get that value 5 times. Okay, and so then there is no forced train purchase, in the sense that this money here, you're not able to buy trains with the money in your hand. There's no bank breaking. There's no fixed bank, which is usually the other way the games end. We have these trains here, so 2 plus a number, or 3 plus a number. So this is large stations, or large, or the large dots, which are the stations. So you can hit 2 of those, and then 1 of the towns. And again, towns we saw a little bit in 1889. There aren't very many in 1889, but there are a lot more in here. Okay, and I will just skip to then you have the 4X. So the express trains, this 4X, hits 4 of the stations and can't hit the little towns. And when you've counted your route out, whatever the route is, you then start and you count the number of hexes it will take you to travel back to where you started. And so the first tile is 0, so you go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and you add 9 to your run, so another $90, £90, because it's obviously English. There are 4X's, 5X's and 6X's. There are some other rules that I won't necessarily go into in specifics. There are private companies, so we've got a whole bunch of private companies here. There are some variants in the rulebook, and I'll be playing with just randomly dealing them out. But you can do an 1830 style auction where you can either buy the first one for face value or bid on the others, £5 more than the current bid, and then it cascades. So when that buys, and if that has a bid on it, that will also sell. And then if that has a bid on it, it will also sell. Otherwise, it will go back to putting down bids. There are rules about if you pass, it will drop the value. And there are lots and lots of variations and other ways of playing in this rulebook, which is actually quite an interesting. It's not something I've necessarily seen in many 18xx games. So I'll just quickly go through these privates. They kind of come in a few categories. There are some other privates that aren't included in the 3 players, so I won't go necessarily into those details, but you have the London and Birmingham, which the owner has the priority to start the London North Western Railway. and so no one else can start that while this is open. So you could start it straight away, or what I've kind of found beneficial in the games I've been running solo, don't start it, and kind of start it your second or third company, but that's just maybe what I've seen. I've, again, not played against real players, so that might be a different thing there. You have a parachute token in York, and so the parachute token, either you can parachute it in for 50, or if you're connected, you get it for free. So fairly straightforward. You've got extra tile lays. Now we haven't talked about kind of tile lays, but you have extra tile lays in specific locations. So Perth, which is up in Scotland, or Leicester. Okay. And again, so the rules are on the back, and they're also in the rule book. You will then have some tokens you can immediately put out. So on there and on there. Now, some of these actions that you take will close the company. Some of these actions won't close the company. And so, for example, the 2 tokens here, they don't close the company. Whereas if you act in Leicester, wherever the Leicester tile is, that will close the company, because the owner, the only person who can lay a tile, and there are all these little LS, GN, CH, LM, they're all the different privates. And so only the owner of the private company can lay a tile on that spot. Otherwise it's reserved until there's a certain phase where you can build over, and by building over you forcefully close that company for your opponent. And so at the beginning of the game it reserves spots, and at the end of the later in the game it will force those to be closed. We then have a variant, and this is again optional. The privates I don't think are optional, but these are. And so there are more again, but it just says for this kind of game you can play 1 per player, and you can do a kind of a draft, or you can do them randomly. So I'm just going to do them randomly. And another variant is you can do 2 each, so I will do 2 each. And so then these are six examples, and so they are basically characters that your different players can use special powers, and they tend to be either once a game, once or twice a game, once a phase kind of powers, and so they tend to be quite powerful but limited because of their number of uses. So I'll quickly run through what they do. So we've got fairly straightforward Robert Stevenson. He receives £10 every time this player's companies buy a new non-express train. I should say that neither the privates nor these characters can ever be bought into a company. So the powers can be used regardless of having been bought in, and you can't like hemorrhage your company for the cash, etc. So all that kind of all those kind of shenanigans are taken away from this game. And so it's twice per game at the start of the stock round. The owner may take the first player order card, and then the other players they maintain the same order. Okay, so that's quite interesting. You've got this one, which is you may play once a phase. You may place a station marker for free. And so what I'll be doing when I've used these for a phase is just turning them sideways, tapping them. And for example, once they're used, I'm just going to discard them because there's no income from them. Sometimes some of them cost $10, or sorry, £10. And then you've got Edmund Beckett, for example. He's going to go around once, and then the next time he is used, he'll be gone because he's a twice per game character. We've then got we've got Thomas Cook. I'm sure people have heard of Thomas Cook, the travel agent, and so he can give the player a 1/10 dividend, even if it's a 5-share company. You just get an extra 1/10 payout of a train company's earnings, and you just do that once each phase. Okay. You've then got George Hudson. So once each phase, a company controlled by the owner may add up to 50 from its treasury and add it to its income, and this affects obviously the amount paid out, but it also affects the stock price jumps, because in this game there's no rising for being sold out, but you do get 1, 2, 3 or 4 time jumps, which again is quite interesting. And then you've got the Herbert Walker. Now this is quite an interesting one later in the game. So it says once the 6Xs have come out, and again this is a once a game use card. The 6Xs come out, you can declare a particular operating round. So you say at the beginning of the operating round, this is going to be the operating round where the theme of it is this company is going to be assisting the First World War effort. And you run your normal trains, but you also are allowed to lease a 6X from the available trains and run a route. As long as you pass through your station marker, you can ignore blocked stations and blocked tiles. So that can be quite a powerful one-time use thing. The only limitation for that is it either must go through Inverness or it must go through Southampton, but it does give you a boosted tile placement in Perth or Salisbury. So in case those have not been developed and you want to use them, you can quickly try and fix it and then sort it out. But of course you decide as the player when to trigger that off. Okay. In the stock market, your actions are sell any number, buy 1 share, or if you've not done either of those, you can convert a company. When you convert a company, again, I've said it already, but you drop the amount down by 2 moves on the stock market. The company then gets flipped, and at that point you get an opportunity to buy a single share at that price, at the new price. But obviously all your current shares have halved in the amount they pay out. The other thing is when you pass, I think both 89 and 46 have the same rule for who gets priority at the end of the stock round. So this is slightly different. Some games do it by the amount of money you have, and so this game is slightly different. So this is the first person to pass gets the first pass, then second, and then third. So the second and third, okay. And if, for example, before the third pass is taken, one of these 2 players goes, again, takes another action, because of course you can pass and still come back in. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. The first pass moves around and moves down, and then the second pass is put back in the middle. And then when the second pass is taken, and then the third pass is taken, and so this is going to be the order of the next operating round. So you always maintain the order of passing as you go, which again is an interesting element to the game. The trickiest aspect of this game, which is the tile laying for you have XXs and OOs, okay? So on your company's turn, you can place a station hex or upgrade, or you can place a non-station, so that's a blank tile, or that is a town tile, and you can do that as a yellow tile or an upgrade. So you could upgrade 2 things, you could do one or the other, or you could do 2. You are only limited to 1 of these, so you could do 2, a blank and a town, or a town and a town, but you can't do 2 cities unless you have a special power that allows you to do so. So if you want to upgrade either an OO or an X, okay, so for example this OO would upgrade to something like this, for example, okay, you have to be able to trace a route to any part of the new track on the tile. So if you're coming from Derby, okay, you're the Midland Railway and you're coming from Derby, to upgrade this tile, you need to be able to come round and have built this. The same turn, if you, say for example you're like this, may as well do it properly. So if you're here, you can't upgrade the O tile because you haven't got access to the new track. So you'd need to build around and then in. Okay, just like that. And then the X's get even more interesting. Okay, they're for the X's are identical to the O's, the double O's, apart from the revenue value. So the revenue value is 10 more at its respective level, but they've got the same kind of standard double O tiles from 1830. And so, for example, here, if let's use, so on a different time, this was built here, okay? You would have to be able to trace this line around this way into here to upgrade this one, okay? Now, when you get to browns, OOs get simplified. Oh, actually, that's a mistake. This is one of the key errors of this game, is putting an XX, an OO on an XX, or vice versa. Okay. So the OOs get simplified. They merge like so, and so that means if you've got access to, if it's a completely unblocked, tile, then you can upgrade it freely. The XXs get really interesting, especially when there's tokens start coming down. So the XXs are worth more, but they never join. Okay, and so what happens? I'm just trying to make sure I've got this. That's not the right one. Sorry, that was a 14. Okay, so this will be here. This one here. So that's there. So at this point, the MR has access to both sides. Okay, so that's fine. Now, if there was another station there, then so this would be fine because he has access to some of the new track. Okay, but if he didn't have access to some of the new track and he had this guy as well, he wouldn't be able to place the upgrade. Okay, because he has no access to any of the new track. He only had access to the old track, and so that means he can't place the upgrade, and so that means he'd have to come around the outside. And sometimes it's interesting because sometimes you can upgrade with one of your companies, but actually the time to upgrade would have been with your other company, which often happens in 18xx, but in this game it makes it a lot trickier. Okay, if the OO is full, so let's go back to my example here. If the OO is full, not with that one, like so, then you aren't allowed to do this unless you have access to some of the new track. Okay, so this, he won't have access to this piece over here because that will be added on. And so because that's being added on, he hasn't got access, he can't do it, because when it's built, those two fill up the spot and he then can't make a route to that. Okay? So he'd have to build around if he wanted to do the upgrade. Usually at that point you just say, I'm not going to upgrade your town or your city. Right, then other things I'm thinking about as I'm talking about the map. You might have noticed when I first saw this map, I was like, wow, that's a really, really harsh map. You can barely move. But don't worry, these are simply mountain kind of iconography. So on some games you might see little triangles, these just simplify that aspect, so, or hills or whatever. So it's basically, if you hit it with some track, you pay, the company who does it pays 50, and if you complete it, so that's the wrong tile, you also pay 50. Now if you were to do it in such a way that you were to hit multiple track in one action, like that, say for example, you would have to pay 50 for every one. Okay, and if you obviously can't, then you won't be able to take the action. The only time you can force a flip of your company and make it into a 10 shares during the forced train purchase. So you can't use terrain or stations to force that to happen. Okay, so I think I have covered most of it. There's probably still bits and bobs that I haven't. Yeah, there are north, south, east, west bonuses. So if you run a train north to south, east to west, and that is actually, interestingly enough, if you run a train from here to here, and then another train from here to here, you would get you'd get the bonus. You'd only get the bonus once, and this is not additional to each side. I've checked with Dave. This is just an additional 20 to your total. And again, east to west, you could have it one to here and then one to here. Again, I've not really seen that being used with multiple trains, but that's probably because I've been playing multiple players and it's harder to calculate and keep all the things in my head. Okay, fantastic. There are, and I should have said this when we were talking about this earlier, there are 2 tiers of train companies. Now the LNWR, at least by the base game rules, you can mix things up if you would like to, but with the base game rules, this always starts in tier 1. Now tier 1 companies, this is randomly decided apart from this, these are the companies you can start in the first OR. And then tier 2 companies can be started from the second OR on, sorry, not OR, SR. First SR, second SR onwards. And again, if somebody's not been started, you can always start them. They're not out of the game. And that's it really. I think there's probably a few little things that I'll mention as the kind of playthrough happens, but that's fantastic. Thank you. This is John, the game trainer. So any comments, likes, subscribes, feedback is fantastic. I've had some really good feedback regarding the 18GB, particularly the unboxing. I really enjoyed it. So keep it coming. Thank you.